Beth Knapp, thank you very much for coming in to the podcast episode today.
Sure.
We saw you have a couple books of poetry there. I brought a couple books too to talk about. I started reading this one that I know you're teaching right now, Sing Unburied Sing.
Mm-hmm.
I only made it through the first couple of pages so far. I just got distracted, but I love the way Jesmyn Ward, I think, creates a mood in her writing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like, from what I've read by her, Salvage the Bones, I guess that's the only one I've read, but she's very good at creating this, I guess, atmosphere, and it seems very similar in Salvage the Bone and this one as well. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it has to do with the childhood's experience of the adult world, maybe. And I don't know, and just like realizing things for the first time. So the beginning of this book starts with the bleeding of the goat, or the killing of the goat, and it's just the perspective of trying to understand what is happening, I think.
First of all, like, shout out to the Gilman Library, which I think you and I are like the two biggest fans in the upper school of Gilman Library. So I see that you got that from the library. So it's like my favorite thing. I don't know.
Take pride in the amount of books you check out and don't read.
Yes, totally. But it feels so fun to take them out. That's when I know I'm a really big nerd. So they're set in the same place, right? She's so, Jesmyn Ward is such I guess, like a disciple of Faulkner in that way, right? And her worlds are in the same place. And it's a fictionalization of where she's from, right? So I think, like, the place is so palpable to her, and so it becomes palpable to us. Have I told you about how I went to her hometown?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and like kind of slightly stalked her to figure out where she lives and see what she's seeing as she's writing these books, and it's pretty fascinating.
What was it like going there? And what is her hometown?
She is it's DeLille, Mississippi. It's kind of near Bay St. Louis and not too far from New Orleans. And so in her book she calls it Bois Sauvage, is like kind of a fictional version of it. And so it's this tiny little, like, rural, kind of swampy bayou like town, and there isn't really even like too much of a town, but kind of just being there and seeing like a playground that's kind of run down with a basketball court that like figures into both Salvage the Bones and this, places that are just it was really cool to be there, and to see it, and the way that I really imagined it and reading it.
Did you go to this place because you're teaching her, or was this?
Yeah.
Were you in New Orleans and just decided to stop by?
It was a little of both. We also did New Orleans on that trip, but because I'm really interested in the Gulf Coast. I've been interested in the Gulf Coast, like, post-Katrina for a while, and the way that the Mississippi Gulf Coast was kind of ignored in favor of New Orleans. And I think a lot of that comes out in her nonfiction and fiction. But in terms of, like, the child, like Esh and Salvage the Bones and JoJo and Sing Unburied Sing, trying to understand or navigate the adult world really without too much adult help. Right? I don't know. I think there's something really identifiable about that, about, like, trying to figure out, like, the difficulties of the world on your own, and particularly for JoJo and Esh, those issues are complicated by where they're born and where they go to school and poverty and all that kind of stuff.
In this one specifically, and I only am speaking on the first 15-20 pages of it, but you're thrown into a situation that's pretty violent and kind of, you're trying to figure it out at first, and it's really the same experience, I think, as a young person trying to go through a situation. I don't know, she does a really good job matching that experience in her writing, or making that real.
Isn't that fascinating too, because it's stuff that she knows as an adult writer, right, that then she can write the character having not, right, conveying to us the way he doesn't understand things or what he's learning. And in Sing Unburied Sing, it's alternating chapters, mainly from his voice and then his mother's voice. And his mother is drug addicted and abusive, and so he kind of is without her guidance. And I think Sing Unburied Sing really stretches the empathy of the reader in hearing from both of those voices.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when we had the speaker. What was her name 2 weeks ago? The poet come.
Oh yeah, right.
When she was talking about the teenage experience,
Yes.
I think it's amazing how you can write about, I guess, the first time you encountered something or experienced it in such clarity as an adult.
Yeah. Well, and I was really identifying with the way she talked about music. Remember, I can't remember her name, and I feel really bad. It was Katie Moulton. Yes, thank you, Katie Moulton. Right. So she talked about the music that you listen to as a teenager is the music that you hold on to like for the rest of your life, and that's certainly true for me.
Yeah.
You know? I was like, I wanted to ask her like more about a soundtrack. Like, wouldn't it be cool if she told us about like a soundtrack to her day? Or I don't know. I think about that a lot. If we're walking around, you know, in our life, what's playing in the background?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
So how, I guess, are you reading this still right now? Or okay, how's that going?
It's good. I think, like I said, in terms of the novel, so I'm reading it with my 12th graders and award-winning novels. It's difficult, and it's difficult because it's can be like scary and violent and harsh. So I think that there is a lot of stretching that readers and students have to do in accessing that. But I have a sticker on my laptop that says practice radical empathy, and so I think that this is a text that really asks us to step into that. But it also leads us to a lot of really good conversations about parenthood and growing up and place.
People say that a lot about reading, like why you read is, or people who read become more empathetic through their reading. Do you think that's true?
What's interesting is that I was just referring to this article or study with my students, and I forgot to look up where it's from, but when a study has been done about reading fiction, it's particularly literary fiction. Reading literary fiction makes us more empathetic, which I think is really interesting, right? So I guess in a way, like reading like high quality, complicated texts then leads us to be more empathetic people. I believe that, and I hope it's true, right? Because I think that's part of what my work is as a teacher.
I don't know if I've ever thought about that question, but I've just heard it said.
Yeah.
I feel like reading has made me more aware. I guess that is what it is. More aware of other people's experiences, and I guess that is what empathy is.
Yeah, that was going to be my question back to you. Is there a difference between, like, what's the gulf between awareness and empathy, right? You can be aware of something and not necessarily, like, feel along with someone, but I think awareness is definitely, like, on the road toward empathy, right?
Yeah, and I think you, especially when you follow a fictional character and you know a lot about the character, you give them the benefit of the doubt, or you understand their experiences on a deeper level. I really like, speaking of George Saunders, who wrote this other one that you teach. Yeah. There's a part of his, what is the book that I taught it about, the short stories?
10th of December? Is it that one?
No, The Swim in, has a strange title that has to do with Gooseberries by Chekhov, but it's a collection of 8 Russian short stories.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then he goes through and analyzes each one on a deep level. And one of the stories, I think it's the first one, is called In the Cart by Chekhov. And it follows this woman, and I forget her name, as a Russian name, but follows her through a couple of days, and you know every single thing about her life. And I feel like there's one part where Saunders, and this always struck me as amazing, is that he talks about how following the character through the ups and downs of a couple of days, and you know everything there is about the person, is almost similar to like why people talk about, you know, how God loves every single person, because God sees everything there is about you. He knows your story from beginning to end. And as a reader, if you know a character's story throughout a certain amount of time, even if they're a bad character or there's something that they have a flaw in their personality or character, you know so much about them that you still love the character,
Right.
which is interesting.
Well, and it doesn't work that way in real life, right? I mean, that's where like the stretching has to happen. Or you think about as teachers when a student walks into our room, like that we're only accessing a fraction of their day. And so if we were reading a short story about them, we'd know all of the things that happened up at that point. And so maybe we'd extend them more grace or generosity or empathy when they walk in the room, right? But that's not the way human interaction works. Mm-mm. So maybe that is the answer to like how fiction, right, gives us empathy because we know more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Your immediate reaction is, why are you sleeping or on your computer in my class, and you don't know the whole stretch of the past week.
Right.
Or everything that's led up to that point. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It kind of maybe gives some pause. Mm-hmm. In my best moments, it gives me some pause to think about that. Yeah.
What are you reading on your own right now? You have a stack of poetry collections. What have you really enjoyed in this collection?
So I started a Master's of Fine Arts this summer, and I am a poet, and I was writing a lot of poetry this summer. So one of my goals for the school year is to read more collections. As a believer that the more you read, the better writer you are, right? And so if I want to be a better poet, like I'm reading more poems. So there are some favorites here, but I just saw a poet, Ocean Vuong, last Thursday at Loyola. He came to speak. Yeah. And I really love his On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. Have you read that?
I've read most of it, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think about that novel a lot. And I heard an amazing podcast on Being with Ocean Vuong where it was just like so brilliant. So he has a new poetry collection here, Time is a Mother. And I really enjoyed being in his presence. He's eccentric and brilliant and thoughtful. And I'm carrying with me like that he talked about that his vocation is teaching and not writing. He said that writing is just an act, which I thought was really interesting. He teaches at NYU. And then he's really talking about like embracing a radical okayness, he said, that he's trying to be radically okay in his life, which I really loved. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of these are women that I adore and that I'm reading. Kate Baer has a new collection actually out today that I want to go get at the Ivy later. Maggie Smith is a favorite poet of mine.
She wrote Good Bones, right?
She did.
Yeah, it's a good poem.
It is a great poem. Yeah. I follow her on Instagram. She's fantastic. Amanda Gorman, who is on my office door. And then this last one is I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood, and by Tiana Clark, who is my poetry professor this summer, who's incredible and really supportive. So I just kind of keep dipping in and out of these works of these fantastic people.
So tell me a little bit more about the experience this summer writing poetry and taking a few classes, right?
Yeah.
What is, so it's the university...
It's Sewanee.
Sewanee.
Yeah, the University of the South, right, in Sewanee, Tennessee. It is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And, you know, we've been to Bread Loaf, and it's gorgeous there, but it rivals.
Really?
Yeah. So
there are a lot of people from Sewanee at Bread Loaf.
Yeah.
Because it's the extension. It's like once Sewanee's over, they're like, what do we do?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Go to Vermont in the summer.
Right, exactly. So I took 2 classes, one a poetry workshop and one like a poetry forms and theory class. So one, more creative and one more analytical. And it was over 6 weeks. And I lived on campus in Tennessee and read a lot and wrote a lot. And it was a really valuable personal and creative experience for me. And I feel like my writing got a lot better. I had an amazing workshop of poets who gave me really good feedback. So it was a stretch and it was hard, but I really liked it. Yeah.
This might be a tough question, but what kinds of things did you learn maybe that you didn't going into it about poetry? Because sometimes I think that the best poetry is almost words put together that you just can't learn. Like I couldn't take a class to learn how to put these words together. Sometimes when I've, and I'm sure you experience this with little kids, but when I am doing the tennis sessions with Lightning or doing a lesson with little kids, they'll say something and put 2 words together or a string of words together that is poetry that I don't think that, I don't know, it'd be very hard for someone to actually teach me that. It's almost an unexpected formulation of thoughts.
So there are a couple things, there are a lot of things I think about that. But one of the things is about even teaching writing as like a high school teacher. I'm not sure that I'm effective at teaching writing. Like I know how to try, and I know how to give feedback, and I know how to, you know, give advice about organization. But I do also think that there are just people who are strong writers. There's something about the way their brain works. And that doesn't mean that like a 10th grader who studies with me doesn't improve over the course of the year. Of course he does, right? But I think that there are writers who come into my classroom for whom like stringing words together is just the way their brain works. Mm-hmm. And so there's a part of poetry for me that is like that. It's kind of just the way that my brain works. I also am I observe a lot, and I am really interested in kind of just like the absurdity of life. And then, but there are things this summer that I learned to think about a lot. I learned to think about like concretely like how the title of a poem like moves me into the body of a poem. I learned to think about really critically, and Tiana, my workshop professor, had us thinking a lot about line breaks and like, what does it mean where the line breaks, and why does the line break there, and is that word strong enough for the end of a line? I thought a lot about clarity. You know, there are lots of things that make sense in my brain, and once they come out, like on my doc, might not. So how to be as clear as possible. So I think there are like concrete things that I think as a person who notices and enjoys writing that then can like hone what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that you had a lot of time or inspiration this summer to mm-hmm. write, or mm-hmm. was it hard in a pretty remote area to, I guess, come up with ideas, or was it easy for you?
I had lots and lots of ideas, and I think I had lots of ideas because I was away from home in a remote area, and for the first 3 of the 6 weeks I was by myself. My family wasn't with me. So there was not a whole lot else for me to do other than like write and figure out what I thought about things and what I wanted to say, which was a huge gift and also incredibly difficult, right? Mm-hmm. To spend that amount of time in one's head and thinking about thinking is a lot. And then that was a different challenge when my family came, which was wonderful to have them with me for the second half, but then trying to carve out the psychological space to be a creative person is something that I continue to struggle with.
Did you have a routine in terms of your writing, or did it come to you mm-hmm. unexpectedly? Sometimes I feel like, it just hits you when you're walking around or you're interacting with people and you have to make note of it somewhere. Mm-hmm. I don't know. If I carve out 30 minutes, it might not be the time to write. And that's sometimes what I say in class too is, I'll give you guys an assignment and you're not necessarily going to be able to write this by sitting down at 10 o'clock at night. Right. You might need to think about it, have it in the back of your mind, and write a note down as you're walking somewhere. Right.
If you looked at like my voice memos on my phone, it's just like chock full of little, notes that I'm making to myself as I'm noticing things. So that's a habit that I am in. But I did have a routine in that, like I had classes and assignments, and being held accountable in that academic way is really helpful for me as like a person who loves school. And then I think there are a lot of things like this. Like once you start doing it, it's like the faucet gets turned on, right? And it just kept coming. Mm-hmm. So once I kind of started and got into this place where I was writing and noticing and journaling, a lot more happened.
Mm-hmm. And it helps to be around a lot of people who are doing the same thing.
That's right. Right. And people who I'm looking around and being like, oh my gosh, they're so good, right? Their work is so good. And the competitive part of me, right? Wanting to be like, show that I can do it too.
Did you do poetry readings in front of people this summer? Was it collaborative?
I did not do any poetry readings in front of people. I wasn't quite ready to do that. Some of my classmates did. But every week I shared a new poem with a workshop, and then it was like critiqued and talked about in class. Mm-hmm. So there was like an audience of people looking at my work every week. Mm-hmm.
How large is that? How many people are there?
I think there were 12, which is a little bit big for a poetry workshop, but I think there were 12 of us, and everyone submitted a poem every week, and then we would give lots of feedback and talk about everybody's poem in the last meeting of the class every week.
And how big is the entire, I guess, summer program? And it's over the course of how many summers?
It's 4 summers.
4 summers.
4 summers, and then like a school year to finish a thesis. It's a lot smaller than Bread Loaf. I think maybe around 75 students total. But there are poets and creative nonfiction writers and short story writers and novelists, stuff like that. So different disciplines.
And it was all focused on poetry for you, pretty much.
For me, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you always know that you were into writing poetry, or is this something that happened recently for you? Or
I've written poetry for a long time. And in college I wrote, and I was in a poetry workshop in college, and but I kind of lost it along the way. And then during the pandemic, when I needed something, right? And I remember talking to Patrick Hastings about like how we were kind of going to get through that weird like hybrid pandemic year where we just all are in our offices and, you know, not being able to associate with anyone. And he challenged me. He's like, you should see if you can write 20 poems this year. Mm-hmm. And I exceeded that goal. And it was just like really cool to have someone else be like, maybe try this. And it was a coping mechanism and something I rediscovered.
Yeah, you almost need someone to hold you accountable
Absolutely.
sometimes.
Absolutely. So Sam Cheney's doing that for me now. He's giving me deadlines for poems that I need to submit to him, and that's really helpful. Yeah.
It's so easy to just get distracted with other things.
It is. And I think the big distinction, and I think about George Saunders with this, or Jesmyn Ward too, is that great writers are really disciplined, right? And it's not something that they can or choose to let go of. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that I've been thinking of teaching this year is that I teach a leadership character class, mm-hmm. and I think even in my junior English class when we talk about the American dream a lot is the one phrase that everyone comes up with and talks about in class is hard work and how important hard work is. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the most successful people work the hardest, and hard work, I just hear it all day long from students. Yeah. And I think that phrase becomes almost meaningless sometimes because in life, everyone who's existing as an adult is working hard. I mean, they're trying for the most part. Right. But I think grit is almost a better word to talk about and to understand and to put into your life, because you know, you could work really hard and at the end of the day, you're tired. You want to go to bed and you don't have the grit or like the click discipline, whatever you want to call it, to say, I need to write my poem and get that done. Yeah. For me, for whoever's holding me accountable, it's just a different type of skill. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, and I think like I like discipline a lot in that conversation. It's like I'm holding myself accountable, right? And I'm focused on what's important for me, right? I think that's a distinction between hard work. And I also think, of course, like, you know, being in the right place at the right time and luck and all of that plays a part in it. That, like, I think it's part of our American identity to believe that it's all hard work. And I just don't think it always or often is all hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of it. Like you've got to work hard. You've got to bear down and get your stuff done. But it's not the whole story.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So I talked to you a little bit about, I guess, Gilman and maybe some observations that you've had this year with the boys at the school, and I'm curious because I've been thinking about the cell phones and how often I see cell phones and how addicted we all are to our cell phones and social media. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the cell phone, on social media, and especially when you observe high school students not becoming more addicted, because I think we all are in some degree, more reliant on our phones. But I, for instance, collect the phones at the beginning of the class.
I do too, yeah.
Which we're supposed to do this year. But if I didn't ask them to put their phone in the bin as they walk in, they'd be just sitting on their phones and not interacting with each other. And I don't know, that kind of rubs me as sad. I don't know, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on observing the cell phone amongst high schoolers, amongst the Gilman community.
So I do collect cell phones, and I'm glad to actually have that as a blanket policy. So it's not just a policy in my classroom. Right? That feels really good to me, something to lean on. And I don't think that it minimizes all distraction, right? They still have iMessage on their laptops or whatever. But I feel like I can control that a little bit more. I know that I have a hard time limiting myself on my cell phone. I have a hard time limiting myself just like mindlessly like scrolling through Instagram, which is, I think, my addiction of choice on my phone, So I think I understand it. And I also know that I use it sometimes as like a way for me to, I don't know, like step back from life and just like shut down for a couple minutes in a way that maybe I need. So I really get it, and I don't want to come out swinging at like the kids who are doing it. But I do worry about the way that it shifts, particularly social media, the way that it shifts like their perception of themselves, and the way so much can be like anonymous. And I think in a lot of ways we are not kind to each other when we can be anonymous. So those are the big things that I think about with them and with my own children, right? Because now I have a middle schooler, so I'm thinking about like, how does he access all of this too? It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and you can't really, I mean, I don't know, you can't really tell your middle school kid that they can't be the only one without, I mean, you can, but
Right.
it's a very hard decision, I imagine,
That's
for
right.
parents to say, you're the only kid at your school without a cell phone, or you're the only kid without TikTok.
Right.
But on the other hand, everyone has access to these platforms, and there's a lot of bad that goes with that. So it's just a kind of in between a rock and a hard place, I would imagine, as a parent.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the tension between wanting a child to like fit in and be social, and also like wanting him to like be healthy. And I'm not sure that the one can be fully healthy with like all that's available to us on our phones.
And I think a lot of the socializing is happening on the phones. They're not just sitting there scrolling. I think a lot of the time they're texting each other and talking to each other.
Right.
But I don't know. It's just a brand new frontier for everyone. And it's really hard to make a decision as to what's the right thing to do with it.
And also I've read, interestingly, like adolescents right now are more risk averse like than my generation was, right? And a lot of that has to do with this way that they're interacting with each other virtually, right? So they're not doing as many drugs, they're not having as much sex, they're not like, engaging in all those risky behaviors that like my generation engaged in. So there is some like level of safety around it. It's always a balance. I don't know.
And I don't think they're getting enough or as much sleep, maybe. I think that's another thing, because most teenagers report that they sleep with their phone right next to them. So it's the last thing they see when they go to bed and the first thing they see when they wake up. Besides the effects of the blue light or whatever, I think you're just it's just the first thing you see, the last thing you see when you go to bed, attached in that kind of way too.
Yeah.
So that affects sleep.
Do you have your cell phone next to your bed?
Well, I think I'm so close to just getting rid of this thing.
Yeah.
And I think I'm different than most people because I've got this Google Pixel, and I take a lot of crap from people who say you've got the green messages. I just really don't. I don't know what has happened with me, but because I used to have an iPhone and I used to be pretty active on Instagram and whatever, but I've gotten off pretty much everything but Twitter. I like Twitter because it informs me a little bit, and I like seeing what people post.
I just said to my advisory just before I came here that I've learned that I was kind of lamenting, if Twitter goes away or whatever, if it shifts, because I've learned so much from Twitter. And they all laughed at me like, what would you learn from Twitter? I'm like, oh my gosh, over the last 10 years, like what the voices I've been introduced to, and I've learned so much.
And it's useful for me in my classes too, because I'll bring up a conversation starter or a painting I see on there. I mean, it just depends on who you follow. If you just follow, I don't know. Yeah. If you follow actually people who are reporting their opinions and different poetry, there's a lot of poetry on Twitter. I'm sure there is on Instagram too. Yeah. So there's a lot you can learn from it.
Absolutely.
So there are good things for sure. It's just it's addicting. It's all made to addict you and keep you on there.
Yeah, and again, like I plug my phone in next to my bed, and it's my alarm, and it so I look at it first thing in the morning. I mean, I know I do all of these things that I'm like don't want the children to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard.
Yeah,
that's my thing too. Is like I would be the first person on a flip phone, I think, if I didn't need Google Maps and Spotify. Like I want my music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But social media for me, I don't think is an issue. I don't really care anymore about, especially TikTok. I just don't even see what the fascination is really.
I saw a meme recently that was like, I'm so old that I look at TikTok on Instagram. Like everything from TikTok that I see is like reposted on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's where I am in my life.
I'm trying to understand what the youth sees in TikTok though. I mean, I guess it's funny. I will say that there's like, you can get a kick out of reading or looking at the videos made on there. But I don't know.
I think we're always lamenting, right? As humans, we're always lamenting like, oh, this thing is dying or this generation is worse or, and I'm just not. I think there are things to be concerned about, but I also have like a great deal of faith in this, these kids who we're teaching right now and the ways that they're thinking about things and interacting and the ways that they want to shape the world, Mm-hmm. And I think that it can be used, all of these technologies can be used for like connection and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so too. What else outside of literature, poetry, and social media, I guess, and phones, have you been thinking a lot recently as you're at school, in the classroom, on campus, just observing, as you said?
Yeah. So I know I've told you this, but like and this is a really small thing, but it's also like a Mr. Henry Smythe thing of like saying, hey, right? That like, I imagine if I had like a camera following me or a GoPro or something, and for every time I say hello to a student, the number of times that there's no response. And then I just came from advisory, right? So it just happened that like I greeted my advisees and like there was hardly any response. And these are all students that I know really well. We spend a lot of time together. And I always say, guys, it's like customary when someone greets you to greet them back. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking a lot about those kind of I don't know if it's just like cultural ways that we interact with one another or the ways that in small ways that we kind of take care of each other, that I don't always experience. And I don't know what that's about. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Is that this year that seems to have changed?
I don't think it's this year that it's changed. I think I'm just like talking about it more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I told you that I've noticed that, but I've also noticed, you say, good morning, Miss Knapp, how are you? And then your student will say, what's up? Like, I've noticed that a little bit too.
Or do you get emails that say, hey, Mr. Scott? I get a lot of like, hey, Miss Knapp.
Oh yeah, but but beginning of the year, that makes me so mad when I get, especially, I mean, I'm probably crazy, but the email thing, I cover the first week on like, you need to send the proper email because I just can't deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd cover that, and I did a competition with my advisory, and I had them write me an email giving me updates on their year and then a ranking of who had the best email.
Oh, nice.
So they're still talking about that, about like, why did our juniors finish last? The sophomores are saying, why did the juniors finish last? Why are you guys last on the email? And they're like, well, I used this comma splice, and Mr. Scott said that was wrong.
That's so good. I love that idea.
Yeah. The advisory, I've really tried to take more stock in this year because I think that's a important amount of time, 30 minutes. You don't get too much time with those guys, but I think it's really, really important in relaying some of the messages that we hear at assembly that they might not always hear. And I understand why assembly is a tough time of day right after lunch, and there's a lot of talk there that they might not catch, but I feel like advisory is really crucial.
Mm-hmm. I like having it more often. And before we moved to this new schedule, we had assembly before third period. And so if you taught third period, you could kind of address, or talk about whatever happened in assembly that day. And that was something that I really valued as part of my like classroom kind of culture, right? Plugging into the like larger Gilman happenings. So I really like to follow up on what's happening in assembly with my advisees. And I'm constantly talking to students about assembly. And that's another thing that I observe that I'm not quite sure why the behavior in assembly is not Gilman Upper School at its best. Mm-hmm. I'm perplexed by that space and behavior in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm trying to think because COVID, I can't even believe last year at this time. Were we in mass at this time?
We were in mass this time last year, right?
Which is almost unbelievable. I just can't really.
Yeah.
I forget that, or I block it out of my mind that
I know,
we were
me too.
wearing masks last year. But maybe it's because they hadn't had the experience of being in that space before. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, I'm trying to remember if I was disturbed by this before COVID. Everything kind of blends together at this point. But, just yesterday we had, a Bryn Mawr faculty member making an announcement at assembly, and then they were like, whistling and kind of responses. And that's an egregious example of bad behavior. But I think like as an upper school, when we're together, we're not acting with like care and generosity towards each other or to the people in the front of the room. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see a situation where like everyone in our community has to at some point, stand in front of that room and present about something that they care about.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that happens, if that's like our sister schools, like a required senior speech or what it is. But I think it's a real, it makes me really anxious. Mm-hmm. It is not an enjoyable time of day for me.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea because I don't think you really understand what it's like to be in front of a room until you actually have to.
That's right.
Especially on a day-to-day basis. Like as a teacher, I remember, playing lacrosse in college, we would always zone in on the things that our coach did every single day, like the little habits, the little ticks that he did. And, we probably weren't respectful and made fun of those ticks, but thinking about it now, my students probably notice that I do the same little things every single day. It's just natural. Every human, if they had to get up in front of a group of people every single day, would do things that are repetitive and just, in line with their personality. That's what they do. Yeah. And you don't understand that unless you have to do it.
Right. Right. And that's a hard room to stand up in front of, right? Under any circumstance. But I think most of the time when people are presenting, it is really about something that they care deeply about. And I really admire the students who stood up in front yesterday, right, and talked about the election and tried to do it in, I think, as nonpartisan a way possible. And so I think that the more students, especially that do that, I don't know if that changes. I don't know.
There has to be a solution to fostering positive behavior in the assembly environment that's not just from the top down telling you what to do, because I just don't think that would go over well. But I don't know. I'm trying to do some point competition incentives with my advisory and reminding them, I'm looking at you guys during assembly. If you're sitting up, you're going to get a point for that day. Some kind of competition incentive. And I don't know if that's right, but whatever it takes to... It's just kind of sad when you look around and guys are asleep or leaning back. Yeah. It's just everything that we talk about are such easy skills.
I think so. And, even last week we had the dean from Dartmouth, right? The dean of admissions from Dartmouth. And it's like, he's here at our school and we are not kind of putting our best foot forward, right? Because he's addressing an audience of students who are checked out, or a lot of them are checked out. And I think we kind of did a good job at the end of that there were students that asked really insightful questions, which always makes me happy when that happens. But, the general demeanor is not one that's like welcoming or curious or engaged.
It's just surprising for a school that's so, especially the college admissions person we're so college focused and grade focused. Here he is. He pretty much told us every single, cliche or piece of advice that you really need. I mean, he went over every single thing
That's
that
right.
you should consider when you apply to schools. I don't know. If I was a junior or senior, I'd probably be taking notes there.
Yeah.
This is straight from the horse's mouth right here.
Right. And even when we have high profile people, that there's an air of criticism from the students that I think is, I don't know, I think it's hard to take too, right? Mm-hmm. Again, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the person standing in front of the room.
So outside of assembly, what are the most positive, good things that you've seen in your classes or in the Gilman community this year? What has been really nice to see after a period of, being at home, at COVID? Yeah. Now we're fully back in action. What's been like the highlight of the school year so far for you?
I have my sophomore class that meets third period even days is like very fun and energetic, and it's like a level of I don't know, energy that I haven't encountered in the last couple of years because of masks and COVID and everything. So they are a real joy. And if they listen, they're going to, I don't know, use that as like, remember that you love us. But I think like that kind of fun, I'm rediscovering a little bit. Like just today we acted out a scene from Macbeth and we were all around a big banquet table and we had Banquo's ghost hovering around and it was just lots of fun. So that group is definitely a highlight. And I think all of our larger community events where just like people are around. Oh, when I walked outside last Friday and the whole band was playing, I thought that was so incredible. And I looked around and so my sixth grader plays the flute and he was there playing. And then BJ's there on his, awesome. On his trombone and I in his football jersey. Right. And just kind of in that moment, right, this kind of quintessential Gilman thing of boys being students and athletes and artists and musicians. Mm-hmm. So that was a highlight for sure. Yeah,
I always think that's cool when someone is involved in the athletic competition going on, but then beforehand they're playing an instrument or they're singing the Star Spangled Banner.
Right. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, a lot of the sporting events have been pretty well attended and excited this year.
Right. Yeah, and I don't want to like, necessarily like circle it all around athletics, but I do think that there's a way that's kind of our community is coalescing around those things in a different way than we have for the last couple of years. It's cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. So what else are you excited about teaching this year? What else is on the curriculum for you? You got Macbeth?
Macbeth,
Do you bring poetry into your classes at all?
I do a little bit more with seniors. Like our next text is Claudia Rankin's Citizen, and we'll talk a little bit about prose poetry in there. A couple with sophomores as it relates to like the larger texts that we're studying. One of my sophomores today asked me if Macbeth was my favorite thing that we read throughout the year, and I think it's definitely in the top 2 or 3. But Frankenstein is coming up, which I always enjoy. Not necessarily like the text on the page, which can be difficult, but the conversations that we have in class around kind of science and progress and the limits of progress is really fun. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, those are the big things. But Shakespeare Festival coming up between Thanksgiving and winter break is always a highlight too.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, sounds good. We're reading some Edgar Allan Poe right now in my classes. We read The Raven, which I think is important because you've got some people don't know. They live in Baltimore. They don't know why the Ravens are called the Ravens. So
travesty.
We have to go through, the poem is not the most uplifting. It's all about grief and sadness and loss and but that's why your team is called the Ravens.
And that's why when you go to the game, right, there are those Edgar Allan and Poe, the different ravens that are running around. I'm always like, did you notice that, guys?
Yep. Yeah. Well, my favorite thing is I give them, I say, if you guys go down to Poe's gravesite downtown and take a picture, give you some extra credit because I think that's just a memory, Right. You might not remember every single thing we talk about this year, but I think if you go with a couple friends down to Poe's gravesite, you'll maybe remember my class one day.
I just did that for the first time maybe 2 years ago. It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any trips going on this year? Anything you are doing in your personal life? Travel at all?
I'm trying to decide whether to go back to Sewanee in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's kind of like the big thing, whether I'll go back to Tennessee for part of the summer and write some more poems. But nothing big planned. I'm trying to, again, think about like the, summer grants and what to do. How about you? What are you going to do? Bread loaf?
Definitely bread loaf again. I'm thinking about doing a trip maybe. I had credit from British Airways because I was supposed to go visit my college roommate, the guy I was telling you about who got hit with a hockey puck.
Yeah.
He was playing hockey in Denmark a couple of years ago, and I was going to go visit him, and then Omicron, I guess that was last year.
Okay.
Omicron hit like right when I was supposed to go, so I had British Airways points. So I just cashed them in and got a trip to London in June before bread loaf. So
nice.
We'll see if I can think of a good grant. I'm trying to think of maybe doing another elective next year.
Oh, what do you want to do?
Maybe something with modernism or I don't know. I want to link it to England and British literature. Maybe could be cool. I've always liked
Zadie Smith. Have you read Zadie Smith?
I love Zadie Smith. Yeah. I
love Zadie Smith too.
Well,
that might be it.
She's funny.
She's super funny.
Yeah, and I like Intimations, her book that she wrote during the pandemic.
I just read a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else have you read by her?
NW, Northwest, White Teeth, On Beauty. On Beauty is, I think, my favorite. Have you read that one?
I haven't. I know it's in the library, though.
Mm-hmm. Second plug for the Gilman Library.
Yeah. What is that one about?
It is about a professor, an American, I think he's American and his wife is English or vice versa, and like kind of moving from England to Princeton, New Jersey, and kind of their relationship and their family relationship. It's really lovely. And I read it the summer I was in Oxford for bread loaf. I took like a modern British literature class when I was there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What was Oxford like for you?
Oh, incredible.
Was that your last year? Or was that?
No, it was my first year, which is really foolish. Like I wouldn't recommend that, but it was really, really a dream.
Now, were you at Gilman when you did bread loaf?
No, it was when I was at Georgetown Prep. Yeah.
And you did it in 4 years or 5 years?
I did it in 4 years, which again I wouldn't recommend, but just because the way my life happened. Yeah. So there was one summer I took 3 classes, and then I transferred one in. Mm-hmm. And the summer I took 3 classes, I was like, oh well. I'll do the King James Bible class and War and Peace. Those were 2 of the classes. And I was like, well, because they're each just one book. Mm-hmm. That was my thinking.
What was your favorite class you took there?
That contemporary British literature class was definitely like in the top. And then I took a poetry workshop class with Paul Muldoon. When one of the summers I was in Vermont, that was really impactful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that again. I audited a class last summer. I just sat in on one because I was like, this is, too interesting not to.
Yeah, what was it?
It was I guess it's an American Studies course, but it was a mixture between art history, and English. So we read Frederick Douglass and Benjamin Franklin. So I've been teaching some Benjamin Franklin here this year, a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe, but we also looked at a lot of paintings in class, early American paintings. And the guy who taught the class, Brian Wolfe, is a professor at Yale and Stanford for a long time, and he's the nicest guy I think I've ever met in my life. And I was just like, Professor Wolfe, can I just hang out and sit in on this class? And he was totally okay with it. So, I mean, you have so much time up there that why not?
Might as well.
And
is that what you talked about last week with your PD session?
A little bit, yeah. I've just been using a lot of paintings in the classroom because I think it helps students see a little bit more clearly and work on analysis. Yeah. So I have them. I usually use Edward Hopper, and I like Edward Hopper a lot because his paintings are so open-ended. Mm-hmm. I actually saw his exhibit in New York City, and just love his paintings. And so you look at the painting for a few minutes, and you just, as a class, observe everything that you see, which I think is an important exercise to do anyway, because we were talking about social media and TikTok, Instagram. It's always just quick video, next thing, quick video, next thing. And you're judging or you're drawing conclusions so quickly that you're not actually looking closely and analyzing something at a deeper level. So I think just looking at a painting and as a class going through everything that we observe helps you see deeper into it, which I think translates to writing.
100%, right? Because yes, absolutely. And there's a way that the students aren't quite making that connection yet, right? But like that skill of close reading is not just about like a book text, but close reading lots of other texts.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of time reading something to actually figure out how to imagine it or put it into your head. And it's hard to do.
And I find that I can't often describe it. Do you know when you watch a movie and the cliche, right, is like, well, it's not how I imagined it, or the book is better. But I couldn't tell you what I imagined. I just know that's not it.
That ain't it.
Yeah.
That's true. We did Great Gatsby this first quarter, and I, for a while, didn't really like the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, the new one.
Yeah.
But I kind of like it now. I don't know why. I don't know why the change.
Is it the amazing soundtrack? It does have an amazing soundtrack.
It does have an amazing soundtrack. I don't know. It just, I guess I have read The Great Gatsby so many times at this point that it livens it up a little bit. And I think at least the students get into the movie a lot.
Yeah.
Where they can put images to some of the more obscure passages that you read.
Yeah. The Great Gatsby is fascinating, right? Because it's such an eminently teachable book that it's like hard to let go, right? Because it's like I don't know. There's so much there to offer to teach and discuss in class.
Did you teach that usually early on in the year when you taught Great Gatsby?
I think it was later in the year. And when I taught Great Gatsby, mostly, I think I taught it 1 year here at Gilman, but before, when I was at Georgetown Prep, American literature was 10th grade. So it was towards the end of 10th grade that we read it. Yeah.
What's your favorite book that you have in your curriculum? Like, what do you get excited about every year to teach? Do you have one, or? It
might be Sing Unburied Sing. I mean, both of those books that you have in front of you, I'm really excited to teach because I haven't entirely figured them out, in a way that I think is really good to invite conversations with students.
So George Saunders has a new book out.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like this one, right?
Maybe.
I think I was reading an article. There's an article with him in the Time magazine that just came out. And he's talking about how, I think it's about General Custer, maybe the new book. It's called Liberation Day or something.
Yeah.
But I like George Saunders because when I was doing, I forget what class I was taking. I was doing a class in college where he came up, and maybe it was 10th of December we read, and I sent him an email because I wanted to ask him a couple questions, and he hit me back like the next day. Yeah. He's really good with that. He's a very nice guy, it seems like.
Well, and I think he's another one, like I talked about Ocean Vuong, right? Who's like a teacher. Like that's what he does. He teaches and he writes, but I think that's part of his identity. Yeah.
I didn't know that about Ocean Vuong that he taught.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Beth.
Am I like how many repeat guests have you had?
We had Ned Emla the other day before the Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good company.
Yeah, for sure. So
thanks for having me.
You're the second one in. So thank you for coming back.
I'll come anytime.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye.